All right, guys, so absolutely a wild story here for y'all on CNN's Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who over the last couple of days have gone out of their way to outright lie about and smear the only Palestinian American congresswoman that we have, Rashida Tlaib, painting her as some sort of an anti-Semite for completely fabricated comments that she did not make. Okay, so there's going to be a couple steps to breaking down exactly what's going on here. But just to start us off, we have this clip of Jake Tapper on his show State of the Union interviewing Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And the core of what they're talking about here is that the Michigan Attorney General has charged many of the protesters who are protesting against Israel's genocide in Gaza. Rashida Tlaib then came out and criticized those charges, right? And we'll get to exactly what her comments were here in a minute. But Jake Tapper is basically just running with this narrative that Rashida Tlaib's comments were obviously anti-Semitic and that she's accusing this attorney general of, being biased because she is Jewish, and that the fact that she is Jewish is the only reason she's charging these protesters. That's what Jake Tapper is insinuating that Rashida Tlaib said. And he is using these made-up quotes, this false narrative, to try to pressure Gretchen Whitmer into condemning Rashida Tlaib. It's wild. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch this clip here, and then we'll follow up.
Your state's Attorney General, Dana Nessel, charged almost a dozen individuals from the University of Michigan over the anti-Israel protests. Among the charges, attempted ethnic intimidation, assaulting or obstructing a police officer, and on and on. These are pro-Palestinian protesters who are being punished and prosecuted. Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who is Palestinian, she called the charges from Nessel, who is Jewish, shameful. And Tlaib said, quote, "It seems that the Attorney General decided if the issue was Palestine, she was going to treat it differently, and that alone speaks volumes about possible biases within the agency she runs," unquote. Nessel responded by saying, quote, "Rashida Tlaib should not use my religion to imply I cannot perform my job fairly as Attorney General. It's anti-Semitic and wrong," unquote. Do you think that Tlaib's suggestion that Nessel's office is biased was anti-Semitic?
Listen, Jake, you know what? All I can say is that I know that our Jewish community is in pain, as is our Palestinian and Muslim and Arab communities in Michigan. I know that seeing the incredible toll that this war has taken on both communities has been really, really challenging and difficult, and my heart breaks for so many. But as governor, my job is to make sure that both these communities are protected and respected under the law in Michigan, and that's exactly what I'm going to stay focused on.
But do you think Attorney General Nessel is not doing her job? Because Congresswoman Tlaib is suggesting that she shouldn't be prosecuting these individuals that Nessel says broke the law, and that she's only doing it because she's Jewish and the protesters are not. That's quite an accusation. Do you think it's true?
Like I said, Jake, I'm not going to get in the middle of this argument that they're having. I can just say this. We do want to make sure that students are safe on our campuses, and we recognize that every person has the right to make their statement about how they feel about an issue, a right to speak out. And I'm going to use every lever of mine to ensure that both are true.
Okay, so in terms of what Gretchen Whitmer said there, she was basically dodging the question, right? She was sort of giving her standard, vapid nonsense sort of answer. People have a right to protest, but we need to protect all communities. Okay, her answer was fine there. The real issue here is the question from Jake Tapper. I mean, make no mistake about it. Jake Tapper just outright said that Rashida Tlaib was making the claim that the Michigan Attorney General is only charging these protesters because she's Jewish. That is not at all, in any way, shape, or form, what Rashida Tlaib said. So here you have a CNN anchor trying to back the Michigan governor into a corner, trying to get her to condemn a representative from her own state based on a complete lie, a misframing of what Rashida Tlaib actually said. Now, we have this here as an update on what apparently Gretchen Whitmer put out after this interview took place, and then there was a bunch of backlash and whatever. And here's what Gretchen Whitmer said after the fact. She said, "The suggestion that the Attorney General Nessel would make charging decisions based on her religion, again, not something that Rashida Tlaib ever claimed at all, but this suggestion that she would make these decisions based on her religion as opposed to the rule of law is anti-Semitic. Attorney General Nessel has always conducted her work with integrity and followed the rule of law, etc., etc." Now, we get to this, because as you can see down here, we have Steve Neveling, who is the reporter who actually interviewed Rashida Tlaib, which is where this entire story is coming from. The quote that we just saw Jake Tapper throw up on screen is coming from this interview, right? So this is the guy who would know probably more than anybody exactly what Rashida Tlaib said, because he fucking did the interview, right? And he says, she never said that Nessel did this because she's Jewish. Never. You're spreading lies. So this story here, this fact check, was posted, I want to take note of the time here, on September 23rd, so that's yesterday, at 1:55 p.m., okay? And their headline here from the Metro Times is, Tlaib did not say that Nessel charged pro-Palestinian protesters because she's Jewish, okay? So they are having to do a fact check now on Jake Tapper for spreading those lies and then doubling down on those lies, putting out this new statement that he managed to back Gretchen Whitmer into a corner into making, right? So here on some of the details from this fact check they had to put out, they say Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, a Democratic state lawmaker, and some news agencies are falsely claiming that U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib said that Nessel's office only filed charges against pro-Palestinian activists at the University of Michigan because she's Jewish. The spurious claims stem from an interview that Tlaib did with the Metro Times on September 13th. Tlaib, who was born in Detroit to Palestinian immigrants and is the only Palestinian American member of Congress, argued the charges were unjust, true, and heavy-handed, true, as a response to peaceful civil disobedience, true. Tlaib pointed out that Nessel, who has been in office since January of 2019, has not filed charges against protesters opposed to racism like the BLM protests, police brutality, water shutoffs, and environmental contamination. So, as they point out here again, Tlaib never once mentioned that Nessel's religion or Judaism had anything to do with this. She never said that. She was pointing out that there seems to be a difference given the heavy-handed response to these critics of genocide on college campuses versus other examples that have taken place under the same office of this attorney general, whether it was BLM protests or protests against police brutality or racism or water shutoffs or environmental issues as well. She's saying there's a difference in how you have handled those protesters versus how you are now handling these pro-Palestine protesters. So she's talking about an institutional bias, right, against critics of Israel. She's not saying anything about this specific attorney general's religion or ethnicity or faith or whatever the case may be. She is not saying that. This is a critique on a hypocrisy here, right, which I think is pretty clear. Now, also keep in mind, while we're on the subject of environmental contamination, this attorney general, Nessel, is the same Nessel who officially ended the Flint water prosecutions without any criminal convictions. No criminal convictions for the poisoning of an entire city. So I think we get a little bit of an insight there in terms of what kind of attorney general this person is. But again, they're making it explicitly clear here. Rashida Tlaib, in this interview that was done by them, never made any point about her being Jewish, never made any point about her religion or her ethnicity, right? But that's the narrative that CNN is running with and doubling down on. That's the narrative that Jake Tapper is trying to push. Now, they continue. They say, it should also be noted that the ACLU of Michigan criticized Nessel for charging peaceful protesters at the University of Michigan. Shortly after the article was published, State Senator Jeremy Moss, a Democrat who happens to be Jewish, posted a screenshot of the story on X and claimed that Tlaib's response was an attempt to divide us into good Jews she accepts and bad Jews. Again, this didn't come from anywhere in the actual interview, right? They're just pulling this out of their ass. I mean, he said, this is a disgusting charge of dual loyalty. Jews in America cannot fully uphold American ideals because we are fundamentally biased in favor of our religion over our citizenship. That's not what she said. Now, what she actually said, here's the quote. She said, it seems that the Attorney General decided if the issue was Palestine, she was going to treat it differently, and that alone speaks volumes about possible biases within the agency she runs. So again, she's talking about other examples of protests similar to the ones that we've seen on college campuses over the last 11 months of this genocide. She's comparing the protests, right, and the lack of charges in one instance, and then these massive heavy-handed charges in this instance. And she's pointing out that there may be a little bit of bias there in the criticism of Israel. Now, we've seen plenty of non-Jewish politicians who take an aggressively pro-Israel stance on these same kinds of issues. I just had a video a few days ago where Ted Cruz, was in one of these Senate hearings and was smearing these protesters as rabid anti-Semites and that they need to be prosecuted, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the politician in question being Jewish themselves. It's a pro-Israel bias. It's an anti-Palestinian bias that she's discussing here. It just so happens that this specific attorney general happens to be Jewish, but there are tons of other attorney generals around the country who are doing similar shit to what she's doing, and they are equally worthy of criticism for the exact same reasons. So this story, it's honestly just disgusting. This is the same Rashida Tlaib, by the way, who was censured by Republicans teaming up with Democrats in Congress, who censored her for what exactly? For saying, from the river to the sea? That's what she got censored for? And they twisted her words into somehow that means that she's calling for the elimination of Jewish people and the elimination of Israel, which is stuff that she absolutely, again, never said at all. This is how she gets treated in Congress. It's fucking disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Now, again, keeping in mind the time at which this article was posted, yesterday, 1:55 p.m. So by this point, not only had this journalist who did this interview already corrected Jake Tapper personally, not only had they posted a fact check article trying to put these people, on the right track, but then after both of those things happened, we then have Dana Bash, of course, going on CNN and repeating this shit, repeating this same lie. Now, she started off by saying this. We'll go ahead and watch a little bit of this clip, and then we'll fast forward because they replay some of the Jake Tapper interview there. But this is her post here. A sad reality: anti-Semitism is everywhere, and it comes from both ends of the political spectrum. And her evidence for how it comes from both ends is that Gretchen Whitmer did not condemn Rashida Tlaib in that first Jake Tapper interview. This is all just, it's so gross, man, at every level. You can see here, right before we play this clip, that, again, the same journalist who did the interview with Rashida Tlaib is saying, now Dana Bash from CNN is lying about what happened. U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib did not say that Nessel filed the charges because she's Jewish. She said that there is an anti-Palestinian attitude among many institutions, and most of them are not run by Jewish people. So he's correcting, again, now two separate CNN, so-called journalists or anchors on this issue for just outright lying about the interview that he did. Now, let's go ahead and watch this Dana Bash part.
And now to a sad reality, and that is anti-Semitism is everywhere, and it comes from both ends of the political spectrum. But politicians sometimes sidestep calling it out when it comes from a member of their own party. We saw two examples on State of the Union yesterday. First, with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, when my co-anchor Jake Tapper asked about a Democratic Congresswoman's accusation that the state's Jewish attorney general was letting her religion influence her job.
Again, not at all what Rashida Tlaib said there. She did not say that this attorney general's religion was influencing her job. They're just making that shit up. How wild is that? If this was a Fox anchor or something doing this egregious of a lie, this is the kind of shit that they would cover and try to expose them as being fraudulent journalists, right? But they have no issue doing this with themselves. Now, we fast forward to a little bit further on in this, where she sits down and she has a conversation with this other CNN contributor, and they discuss this, and he repeats, again, the same lie. Let's go ahead and watch this.
CNN's David Chalian is back with me. I was grateful for that, as anybody who is the subject and the victim of anti-Semitism, hate, or any other hate. And the key is, which we have learned the hard way, is you got to call it out no matter where it comes from. What does it tell you about the inability or unwillingness to do so when it comes from a prominent person in your own party?
That you change your word. It's not an inability. Yeah. It's unwillingness, and it's because you're putting politics ahead of principle and morality. And that's what both of them did there. It's not very hard to say that Rashida Tlaib saying that Dana Nessel is pursuing charges because she's Jewish is an anti-Semitic thing to say. It is.
Okay, yeah, that would be an anti-Semitic thing to say, except she didn't say that at all. That's a complete lie. Never said it. She didn't say that Nessel was only pursuing charges because she's Jewish. You're just making that shit up. I mean, 3 different CNN hosts or anchors or contributors or whatever you want to call them, repeating the same lie back to back to back, even after being fact-checked by the journalist who conducted the interview with Rashida Tlaib. I mean, this is our media for you, right? They are perfectly willing to twist the words of the only Palestinian American member of Congress that we have in order to serve this narrative that the left, right, people who are critical of apartheid, critical of genocide, who don't want our taxpayer dollars going to the endless slaughter of innocent men, women, and children, right? She's perfectly willing to equate those people who have real and valid critiques of the Israeli government, not of the Jewish people, but the Israeli government, to equate them with the problem on the right of literal, outright neo-Nazis. They're perfectly willing to equate these two things. By the way, I might not get a chance to cover it in its own video, but I just saw clips the other day of Trump at some of his rallies, who was outright saying, not only am I selling out, my own administration to the Israeli government, taking millions and millions of dollars from the Adelsons in order to give Israel permission to annex the West Bank. And also, by the way, during my previous administration, I gave them the Golan Heights and I gave them Jerusalem and I did all of this and that. I moved the embassy for them. Not only is he saying explicitly, I am a corrupt sellout for Israel, but also during that same speech, he outright blamed Jewish Americans for his own potential loss in the 2024 election. He said, if I lose and Jewish Americans vote for Kamala, then Jewish Americans should be to blame for that, right? They're signing their own death warrant. They're feeding into their own demise in this country. That's what Trump is saying. So Trump is explicitly being anti-Semitic, right? While also selling himself out to Israel, ironically. But he's being explicitly anti-Semitic and lumping all Jewish people around the world to the actions and the interests of the government, the state of Israel. And he's saying, I'm going to blame you if I lose this upcoming election. So on the right, you can have pass after pass after pass, even when it comes to brazen anti-Semitism. And that will all be lumped in with what? Rashida Tlaib criticizing the prosecution of anti-genocide protesters on college campuses. That will be equated with people who don't want our tax dollars going to fund the destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza. I mean, it's so brazen and it's disgusting. Not to mention the obvious, bias and racism that is directed against Muslim Americans and Palestinian Americans as well. We just saw a clip the other day in one of my videos where I think it was the Louisiana senator, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he told one of the executives at the Arab American Institute to put a bag over her head while he accused her of being pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah and pro-terrorism, even after she clarified exactly what her position was. You can be as racist openly in Senate hearings as you want if that racism is directed against Arabs, if that racism is directed against Muslims, right? But when it comes to the issue of Israel, you can't even criticize the Israeli government without it being called anti-Semitic. We passed laws in this country. They passed legislation officially codifying that being anti-Zionist is the same as being anti-Semitic. I mean, it's honestly dangerous stuff. It's obviously hypocritical stuff, and it's definitely not journalism. I mean, this is journalistic malpractice. This is outright lying in an attempt to smear a Democratic congresswoman who just so happens to be Palestinian American and willing to criticize the obvious genocidal and war crimes of the Israeli government. This is not a complicated issue, guys. It's not a complicated issue. We have a select handful of members of Congress that are actually willing to criticize Israel, that are willing to follow international law and U.S. law and try to push for the cutting off of weapons to Israel as this continues. And they are all relentlessly smeared by the rest of our corrupt political class and by the rest of our corrupt and morally bankrupted media ecosystem in this country. I mean, it's just insane. Back to back to back lies. Now, of course, at the same time, on the same network, we also have Hillary Clinton. Now, I won't subject you guys to listening to an entire Hillary Clinton clip here, but she was also participating in bashing these student protesters here. Here's what she said from our boy Prem. Outside funded groups morphed student protests into something not student-led. Some students hold strong opinions with no factual historical basis. Do you know that there are Arab Israelis, some in the IDF. This whole from the river to the sea, what river, what sea? So here we have Hillary Clinton. Now, during this interview, she insinuated, or outright claimed actually, that the student protests on college campuses across this country, protesting a genocide in Gaza, have been funded by outside sources, foreign governments like Iran. She, of course, did not provide a lick of evidence for any of those claims. She just says them, right, with little to no pushback. But she's jumping in on this as well, on the same network. I mean, it's just amazing, guys. Outside funded groups morphed student protests into something not student-led. The students have no factual historical basis, really. Really. Do they know that there are Arab Israelis, some of whom are in the IDF? So what? Because there are Arab Israelis, because there are Arab Israelis who happen to serve in the IDF, therefore what exactly? Israel is immune from any allegations of war crimes or human rights abuses or violations of international law? What even is the point of what she's saying here? I mean, she's criticizing the student protesters. I would bet that your average student protester leading some of the encampments across this country have much more of a historical and factual understanding of what's going on here than Hillary Rodham Clinton does, clearly, right? From the river to the sea. What river? What sea? What are we doing here, guys? It's the Mediterranean Sea, right? The Jordan River. I think that's pretty explicitly clear. People who are saying from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, are saying something pretty simple. They're saying that Palestinians do not deserve to live under illegal occupation, decade after decade after decade, right? Or a blockade when it comes to Gaza. They don't deserve to live in an apartheid, right? They deserve freedom and sovereignty and dignity and basic fundamental human rights. That's what people are saying. It's not a complicated slogan. It's not something that's calling for the eradication of Jewish people. What are we talking about here, guys? So there you go. I mean, absolutely insane story. I don't think it's surprising, given what I've seen from Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, over the last couple of months. I mean, this is the same Dana Bash. I'm just remembering that I covered a video on a few months back when these protests were hitting their peak, where she was comparing them to the brown shirts. She was comparing these anti-genocide student protesters to outright Nazis. So you wouldn't expect anything different, but it's no less disgusting to see them just outright brazenly lie and to make up quotes that Rashida Tlaib never said.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying